たちもね何
I am not very fond of thing-bad content. That might sound a bit odd, considering the basic bread and butter for video essay channels like this is to complain about some random piece of media and explain how its very existence is an affront to God, but I've felt this way for a long time now. Despite being the most popular form of media analysis on the platform, I've started to feel like it's sometimes a little one-dimensional. That doesn't mean it doesn't have value, of course. It can still be funny to see someone rant and rave about something they don't like for 30 minutes to an hour, but as far as serious media analysis goes, I feel like its potential is somewhat limited. It's kind of easy to point at things on the screen and say things like, "That's stupid," or "That doesn't make sense," and to make matters worse, people will often take these surface-level takes and proceed to treat them like gospel, which has unfortunately made the problem with media literacy on the internet even worse. That's why with my first two videos, I tried to focus on more positive subjects. Overall, I think there can be a lot more to learn about a piece of media, or even just art in general, by examining something you think is good or maybe misunderstood, rather than focusing on something you only have negative things to say about. With that being said though, criticism is an important part of art, and that means there will always be a place for more negative critique. So while I don't plan on this channel becoming focused around this type of content, there may be times where I do indulge in a bit of negativity, so long as I have an actual unique perspective to add to the conversation, which is what leads us to the topic of this video. If you spend any time in the Dragon Ball fandom online, you probably don't consider someone calling Resurrection F mediocre a very hot take. There are already plenty of people, both on YouTube and on other platforms, who have pointed out the many perceived flaws of this movie, and that's the exact reason why for a while I wasn't sure if I was even going to talk about it. Like I said, if I'm going to make a video criticizing something, I at least want to make sure that I have something worth saying. I don't just want to be the 500th person talking about how the lizard spaceman getting so strong in a few months is real stupid. But don't worry, we are gonna talk about that. After watching Dragon Ball Super Superhero in theaters though, which I now realize was 3 years ago, I've been sitting on this idea for a while, and giving the whole idea more thought afterwards, I realized there was something at least a bit more unique I had to say about the movie. A lot of people have talked about how this movie fails as a movie, and most of the criticism is focused on why it's bad in a vacuum, even if they are bringing up other parts of Dragon Ball to support their arguments. What I haven't seen anyone talk about, though, is the effect this movie had on the Dragon Ball franchise moving forward after its release, which, in many ways, I consider to be a far greater sin than its general quality. I can forgive a shonen anime movie for being kinda bad. It's not like almost any of the original Dragon Ball Z movies were anything better than some mindless fun. But what I struggle to forgive, what I've realized over time truly makes me hate this movie, is the damage it has done to the series as a whole. Resurrection F and the movie that came before it, Battle of Gods, were essentially the start of a new era for Dragon Ball that can be described as modern Dragon Ball. Only a few months after Resurrection F was released, Toei Animation released a full-on sequel to the anime named Dragon Ball Super. Super was mostly positively received when it was released, but as more time has gone on, it has only become more and more controversial within the fandom. There are still people who will defend it, of course, but I think whether you love Super or hate it, it's hard to deny that in many ways it was flawed. Whether it's just minor nitpicks or more serious criticisms of the writing or direction, I think most people can agree it has some pretty serious shortcomings. What I don't see a lot of people talk about, though, is how almost all of these flaws can be traced back to a single origin, and that's Resurrection F. I genuinely believe this movie is what started Super down the path it ended up taking, and almost all of the big issues within the anime are a result of Resurrection F and the standard it set. So to prove my point, I'm going to talk about the movie and go over its many flaws, and as I go, I'll explain how I believe those issues impacted the series going forward. I'm not really going to bother with a super lengthy plot synopsis or anything like that. It's a pretty simple movie, and if you're watching this video, I assume you've seen it. Frieza comes back, he shows up on Earth, Gohan and the other side characters fight his henchmen while Goku and Vegeta are off planet. Goku and Vegeta arrive, Goku fights Frieza, he gets cheap-shotted, Vegeta beats Frieza up, Frieza rage quits existence, Whis reverses time, and Goku kill-steals like a Call of Duty player. There. That's the whole movie. Before I dive headfirst into negative hater mode, I figured it would be nice to at least spend a little bit of time talking about things I actually like. With that in mind, let me start off by saying that if you enjoy this movie, I honestly don't blame you. If you go into it just looking for a fun action movie where you get to see a bunch of cool action scenes, you're not gonna be disappointed. Just like with Battle of Gods, the production value is a lot higher than with a lot of the older movies. The action scenes are all pretty fun, even the Z-Fighters facing off with the Frieza Force is enjoyable enough, although it does start to drag on for too long in order to pad the runtime. I think that both Goku and Vegeta's outfits in this movie look really cool. I honestly wish they had stuck with this look for all of Super instead of just going back to their Z outfits, especially because I think it's very clear Super Saiyan Blue was designed around this look, and because of that, their blue forms look really, really good in this movie, but in Super, once they drop these outfits, the form starts to clash with the rest of their design, at least in my opinion, especially Vegeta's armor. I think that Beerus and Whis were still pretty enjoyable in this movie, even if they do contribute to some of the problems, which we'll get to later. And lastly, as short-lived as it was, Vegeta's beatdown on Frieza is probably one of the most satisfying moments that has come out of the modern series. Overall, there is genuinely some stuff within this movie that's worth praising. If I were to rank all the Dragon Ball movies, which who knows, maybe I will at some point, this movie would not be at the bottom. It is definitely more watchable than some of the Z movies. That's pretty much all the nice things I have to say though. It's all downhill from here. Generally, if your movie is going to be a simple story about a few characters beating each other up, like most Dragon Ball movies are, you need to make sure that there is tension within the story to keep the plot engaging. Usually, this is pretty simple to accomplish, at least in the usual format Dragon Ball movies use. Just establish a villain and their motivations, then have them show up and come into conflict with the Dragon Team to show how strong they are. There are some movies that stray away from this formula a little bit, like Dead Zone, but for the most part, this is the format used by the movies to varying success. The modern Dragon Ball movies that started with Battle of Gods, however, started to play around a bit with less straightforward ideas for the plot, and as a result, the stakes needed to be handled differently. Battle of Gods kind of tries to trick you into thinking Beerus is a more traditional movie villain when really he's a more neutral type of character that can be stopped without killing him. Dragon Ball Super Broly not only has the stakes of whether or not Goku and Vegeta can defeat Broly, but also takes the time to establish Broly as a character to make the audience actually care about him. So that way, another stake for the plot is whether or not Broly can be saved, or if the protagonists are going to have to kill him. Finally, while Superhero probably has the most lighthearted tone out of all of these movies, and that's reflected in the villains, the movie still makes sure to establish that while the Gammas and Dr. Hedo are not truly bad people, the new Red Ribbon Army is still going to use his inventions to conquer the world if Piccolo and Gohan fail. And because they're the two strongest characters on Earth at the moment, this looming threat actually functions within the narrative. Out of all of these, Resurrection F is the closest to the more simplistic narrative style of the old movies, yet despite that, it completely fails to actually establish consistent stakes. The initial premise is simple. Frieza is coming to Earth to kill everyone, and when he first arrives while Goku and Vegeta are off-world, there is at least some sense of urgency. Although wasting as much time as they do on the Dragon Team fighting his nameless henchman was probably a mistake, the situation would have felt a lot more dire if Frieza himself had actually joined the fight a lot sooner and established how much stronger than everyone he was in a more prolonged scene rather than just gut-punching Gohan once. Regardless, basically the moment Frieza decides to stop sitting on his ass, Goku and Vegeta arrive, and that's when any actual concern about what might happen starts to evaporate. It's pretty much immediately shown that Goku is a match for Frieza in combat. It's only when they transform that Frieza starts to get the upper hand, and by then, not only is Vegeta still standing right there to take over the fight if Goku goes down, but Beerus and Whis have also arrived. And while, sure, Beerus said he's not going to interfere with Frieza's revenge, it's very hard to believe he's going to sit there and let Frieza blow up the planet when it's Earth that's providing him with all of this food he likes. So with Beerus there, the only remaining threat is whether or not Frieza kills Goku and some of the others, but even that idea starts to feel like an impossibility when Goku alone is giving Frieza this much trouble, and even if he does manage to beat him, they have a Sensu Bean waiting for him. It gets bad enough that by the time Vegeta steps in, they stop trying to make Frieza threatening altogether and just have Vegeta bully him with no difficulty. And while I do love that scene, it demonstrates just how badly the movie fails to make Frieza seem like he's actually capable of accomplishing anything, to the point where in the climax they need to have Vegeta stand there and let Frieza blow up the planet like an absolute moron. Thanks, I hate it. If they had wanted the movie to have an actual sense of urgency and danger in the second half, they would need to have beer and whiskey not show up on Earth at the bare minimum. It would probably also benefit them to have Frieza actually be more convincingly strong, so that Goku and Vegeta need to fight him together, you know, like the movie sets up instead of having them take turns. In regards to Super, it might be a tad bit unfair to say that this movie lacking tension impacted Super. After all, I doubt Toriyama intended for the movie to lack tension, but I do think that this does signal the start of a rather unfortunate trend that is continued in Super. Ignoring the two movie adaptation arcs, most of the major arcs in the Super anime suffer from this same problem. The Universe 6 tournament has the stake of Earth getting transported to Universe 6 if they lose, but that's not even really that bad of a consequence, and it's made even worse by the fact the arc itself doesn't treat the tournament like a very serious endeavor. Goku and Vegeta spend almost all of the tournament screwing around and not even going close to all out, to the point where Goku almost loses because of it, and it's only when Hit steps up that things even get remotely serious. Overall, it's kind of difficult to think the tournament is even that serious when the characters themselves aren't taking it seriously. But granted, it is a tournament, so maybe you can cut it some slack. You can't really give that same defense to the future Trunks arc though, which is clearly trying to be a more serious arc rather than just a fun tournament. The arc starts off strong with the death of future Bulma and seeing Trunks almost die trying to stop Black, but almost immediately the arc starts to lose its way as things progress. They want Black to be this scary, threatening villain, but it's hard to view the situation as that urgent when he's stuck in the future timeline and it's the protagonists who keep going into the future to fight him, then back to the past after he kicks their asses. If he had traveled into the present permanently, maybe it would be different, but as it is, there is really no consequence to Goku and Vegeta losing that the audience even cares about. Trunks' timeline is already beyond fucked, and the one character aside from Trunks we were attached to is already dead, so why should we care? And when he finally does start to threaten the main timeline as Infinite Zamasu, Goku pulls out the Zeno button and solves the problem immediately. Thanks, I hate it. The Tournament of Power is really the only arc out of this bunch that manages to keep consistently threatening stakes in the form of the universes being erased, which is constantly reinforced every time one of the other universes lose, and we can only hope that if the anime comes back, it will try to not fall into that same trap of forgetting to add impactful stakes to the conflict. Near the start of the movie, there's a scene that has stuck out to me since I rewatched the movie for the first time as an adult. Once Goku and Vegeta finish training with Whis, he suggests that if they work together they might be able to defeat Beerus, only for the suggestion to be pretty much immediately shot down by Vegeta. While on a casual viewing it may not really stick out, I honestly do think it's a pretty clear representation of a problem that exists throughout the entire film. Compared to a lot of other shonens, Dragon Ball takes a much more subtle approach when it comes to character growth, at least within the original manga, and because of that, when newer material comes out, even material written by the original author, pieces of character development or growth can be easily undone because the person writing the script simply didn't put much thought into the details. And this movie is probably where I'd say that problem is by far the most present. There are so many details you can point to within the movie that either go back on a lesson a character already learned, or just outright contradict something that was established by their character. The prior mentioned scene with Whis is a pretty clear example of this. While on the surface, it seems in character for Vegeta to refuse to work with Goku under any circumstances, this undermines something that was very important to the Buu arc and the end of the manga. A lot of focus is put on Goku and Vegeta finally learning to put their differences aside and fight the common enemy of Buu together, as opposed to earlier where Vegeta knocked Goku out and tried to handle the threat himself, which led to his death. You could argue that Vegito is meant to be a literal manifestation of them learning to work together and the power it provides them. And even if you don't want to go that far, the two of them working as a team was absolutely essential to defeating Buu with the Spirit Bomb. Combine that with the fact that Vegeta didn't need much convincing to share his ki with Goku during Battle of Gods for the sake of the ritual, and it's fair to say that Vegeta by this point in the story should have moved past his refusal to work with Goku. Except apparently he never did, because all of a sudden he's back to outright refusing to work with him at all. You can't even say he just didn't want to fight Beerus with him, because when Frieza shows up, Vegeta shows no interest in working with Goku to stop the threat to the planet. Instead, he's content to just sit there and watch even while Goku starts losing. And to make matters even worse, once Goku goes down, Frieza offers Vegeta the opportunity to kill Goku and become his second in command, and it's almost framed like Vegeta might genuinely accept. Like, sure, maybe you could argue it was just for the sake of the movie, but this is still just stupid. Vegeta, this is the man who genocided your race and is here to kill your wife and child along with everyone else you even remotely care about. Why are you acting like you genuinely might just want to become a space murderer again? It doesn't stop with Vegeta either. There are a bunch of more minor examples you can point to, like Gohan apparently not learning his lesson from the Buu saga and not keeping up with his training at all, which this movie wasn't the first piece of new Dragon Ball media to do that, but it's still frustrating. Especially considering it leads to a cycle of him learning to not slack off, only to then slack off again throughout all of Super, basically even up to Superhero. Overall though, at least Gohan is a minor character, so it can be forgiven. The other big victim of this problem in the movie is, of course, Goku. At the end of the first half of the manga, Goku chooses to spare Piccolo Jr.'s life rather than kill him, and it starts a trend for his character that leads into the second part of Dragon Ball. He tries to give Raditz a second chance and ends up just getting taken advantage of, and later on he spares Vegeta, but only after he's been badly injured and can't fight any longer, showing Goku has gotten a bit smarter about when he shows mercy to people. This continues on to Namek, where Goku continuously tries to spare those he faces, while Vegeta lectures him about being too soft, and how to be a true Super Saiyan he needs to be an emotionless killing machine. This ideological difference between them comes to a head in the fight with Frieza, where it is Goku's emotions and his pure heart that allow him to become a Super Saiyan, but when he tries to spare Frieza the same way he did Vegeta, Frieza throws that second chance back in his face, forcing Goku to finish him, much to his disappointment. This is a pretty pivotal moment for Goku's character within the original manga, as it's when he finally learns to balance his kindness with a certain amount of realism. He doesn't just start murdering anyone who opposes the Dragon Team, obviously. Part of his reason for not wanting to kill Dr. Gero at the start of the Android arc is that he hasn't even done anything wrong yet, and despite how much he had done, he was still willing to give Vegeta a chance to change. Goku does, however, seem to realize that there is no good in showing mercy to people who will never accept it. Someone like Piccolo or Vegeta may take the opportunity to leave and perhaps will change with time, but people like Frieza are different. Frieza is simply too deluded, too prideful to ever accept mercy from an enemy. Goku could offer it to him again and again, and he would never take it. In the end, when you're faced with a person like that, someone who would never allow themselves to change or even to take the mercy offered to them, there is really only one thing you can do. Goku learned that lesson on Namek, and it's reflected in the Cell games where he urges Gohan to finish Cell rather than make the same mistake he did on Namek. And while he does spare Majin Buu in the Buu saga, he does so only because he wants to give the next generation a chance to defeat this new threat. Overall, this is pretty clear character progression for Goku. He learned to be smarter about who he offered mercy to, and that with some people, the only option is to defeat them to keep them from hurting anyone else. Except, I guess he didn't learn his lesson, because in this movie he talks about letting Frieza go so that they can fight again once he's recovered. Not only is this an extremely frustrating regression for Goku's character, but it's made even more infuriating by the fact that Goku pausing to say this is why he gets cheap-shotted and almost dies, which is what leads to all the other bullshit in the climax happening. They even try to have Goku learn the same lesson after the planet blows up and have him be like, oh gosh darn it, I should have finished him off when I had the chance. Yeah, no shit Goku, it's almost like you learned this lesson years ago. Goku and Vegeta are definitely the two biggest victims of this, but I do think a dishonorable mention should also be given to Frieza here. While he doesn't regress in the same way, I still think the plot of the movie heavily damages his character to the point of it almost feeling like character assassination. Apparently, this entire time he had the potential to surpass almost everyone in Universe 7 with only a few months of training, yet he just never even considered training before. The common response to this is that there was nobody stronger than Frieza he wanted to defeat, which the movie itself kind of contradicts by mentioning he was warned about Buu, but even ignoring that, this still fundamentally recontextualizes so much of Frieza's decision-making. Why the hell was he so afraid of the Saiyan's potential to grow in power if he himself had never trained a day in his life? If you're worried about a Super Saiyan rising up to kill you, wouldn't it be easier to just train rather than kill a large portion of your military? Maybe you could say Frieza was just lazy, or that he was scared of the Super Saiyan's lore or something, and sure, that's not completely unfair. The Namek arc already showed that Frieza preferred to just sit on his ass and let his minions handle things, so the idea he'd rather blow the Saiyans up than get stronger makes some sense. And maybe, because he had no way to gauge a Super Saiyan's power, he just thought even his potential wouldn't be enough to stop them. Fair enough. But no matter what, you cannot deny that this revelation about his untapped potential makes his appearance at the start of the Android arc utterly moronic. Frieza at this point has now seen what a Super Saiyan can do, and he knows that his original power wasn't enough to beat Goku. It's implied that the mechanical upgrades he was given made him stronger, sure, and maybe he thought that boost was enough to kill Goku, but why the hell would he even take the risk? If he's willing to train after getting brought back by the Dragon Balls, why wouldn't he be willing to do so after he was rescued from death the first time? If anything, Frieza should be more traumatized at this point, and thus more worried about facing Goku again, which makes the fact he didn't feel the need to train even more confusing. Did he lose some of his potential when his body got blasted apart like Darth fucking Vader? Considering how much potential Android 17 seems to have while just being a human cyborg, you'd think that Mecha Frieza would have even more absolutely ridiculous potential for growth, which begs the question, is Frieza just stupid? Really, that's the only conclusion you can come to with Resurrection F in mind. Instead of being extremely arrogant, Frieza now just comes off as an absolute idiot. There is no amount of arrogance or pride that should make you make such poor decisions when you're planning your revenge against the guy who beat you last time. The only reasonable answer is just stupidity. It was already going to be extremely difficult to make Frieza intimidating again after his meltdown on Namek, and after Trunks took him out like a low-level mob in an RPG, and the changes made to his character only make that problem worse. How are we supposed to view this guy as even remotely competent at this point? He has basically let his enemies beat him 2 times at this point due to not preparing properly, but when he shows up on Earth, we're supposed to actually think he isn't going to just make the same mistake again? Which, of course, he did. And the majority of these character issues carry over into Super, along with completely new ones that are put into the show over time. Characters are either regressed and forced to forget their previous character development, or, like Frieza, are just altered to the point of feeling like bastardizations of the characters they used to be. And while I've seen people defend some of the character changes in Super, overall, I think it's extremely difficult to deny that a lot of them do just come from the people in charge of the writing, be it Toriyama or one of the people writing Super, just not putting enough thought into their decisions. We finally arrived at the one everyone knew was coming. If there's one thing about the fandom's reaction to this movie that lives in infamy, it is the response to Frieza's ridiculous growth in power after only 4 months of training. Many people have already explained why this level of insane growth is stupid from a more nerdy power scaling perspective, and unfortunately, despite that, a large part of the fandom is still in denial about it and constantly tries to bring up moments from the manga which they perceive as just as nonsensical. And look, I could spend a ton of time talking about how Frieza getting so strong makes no sense from a purely logical perspective. I could go into huge detail about why it's stupid and there's no logical justification for it, but I'm not going to do that. That aspect of the topic has been done to death, and I really don't see much of a point in talking about it. What I am going to do, however, is talk about why this power-up sucks, not just from a logical perspective, but from the perspective of the narrative as well. Within the shonen fandom, the term power creep has become viewed as a very negative thing. And while it can definitely be done badly, don't get me wrong, I think power cliffing has its place in more action-oriented stories. Sometimes it can be done to raise the stakes, and other times it can be done to show how far the heroes have come since their earlier days. And in the case of Dragon Ball, it's just a sense of logical progression. Goku and pretty much everyone else on the Dragon team are characterized as always training and trying to grow stronger. So with the passage of time, it only makes sense for them to grow significantly stronger until previous powerful threats are no longer a big deal to them. I say this to put it into perspective that even before Battle of Gods came out, that Goku and everyone else had already come a long way since the days of Frieza. Even within the Android arc, at the very beginning of the arc, we see Frieza get dispatched by Trunks, who then warns everyone of an even greater threat, and the amount of growth we see from some of these characters in this arc after that initial fight is honestly insane. It's not really an exaggeration to say that Trunks at the start of the saga is absolutely nothing to the likes of any of the powerful characters at the Cell games, or hell, even someone like Android 16. By the time of the Buu saga, Frieza has become so irrelevant that the Supreme Kai basically views Frieza as insignificant and is honest to god more intimidated by Pui Pui, the same character who Vegeta then humiliates and kills without even going Super Saiyan. I hope that example demonstrates how narratively Frieza by this point has not been relevant for a long time, and that's why him catching up to Goku and Vegeta in the way that he does causes problems. It doesn't even really make Frieza seem powerful as much as it just makes Goku and Vegeta's progression seem less impressive, and that's only when you take into account the original manga. When you start talking about Battle of Gods, the narrative issues this causes become even more apparent. A huge part of the climax of Battle of Gods is spent on showing how through absorbing the power he achieved through the Super Saiyan God ritual, Goku has achieved a completely new level of power. This is a level of power Goku didn't even think could exist before he achieved it, one that completely eclipses everything he had done up to that point. Then he absorbs all of that power into his normal state. It seems pretty clear that the intent here was for Goku to reach a new threshold, to rise to a completely different tier of power that makes everything that happened before look like nothing in comparison. While some people may criticize this decision in general, I think in a vacuum it was fine. In fact, I'd say it was almost exciting at first. In a way, it's almost a parallel to the beginning of the second half of the manga when Goku needs to train to defeat the Saiyans, and by doing so, he reaches a level far beyond anything anyone on Earth had ever achieved before. Now, Goku has moved past even that benchmark. He has grown past the likes of Frieza, Cell, and Buu, and now reached the level of people like Beerus. And at the time, it was interesting to think about what new threats or enemies he might face now that he had reached this level. That was until Frieza came back. The idea of Frieza coming back and catching up to Goku the way he does basically completely undercuts everything I just talked about. All of a sudden, this new level of power Goku has achieved loses all of its intrigue and wonder when Frieza shows up again and is able to match that power just by training, which is made even worse by Super having Whis outright tell Vegeta that he would never be able to surpass Beerus through normal training. Despite even Goku's normal state now being completely beyond everything in Z, Frieza is able to invalidate that because I've never trained before. It just serves to make Goku's new power with God Ki seem significantly less impressive, and in the end, turns it into the absolute worst kind of power cliffing, with the kind where it exists, but you can't even really tell that there's a major difference unless you're the kind of nerd who pays attention to that stuff. Outside of his new blue form, Goku essentially goes back to feeling the exact same way he did before Battle of Gods in this movie. That sense of insane progression just evaporates, with the only exception being his stupid new form. Maybe if Frieza had, I don't know, found some sort of way to acquire God Ki when he was down in Hell, then trained for a few months, him being so close to Goku would be a bit easier to stomach. At least then there'd be more of a specific justification, but as it is, it only serves to weaken what Battle of Gods set up. And out of all of the trends that were carried over from this movie into Super, this very well might be the most irritating, because Super decides to keep the whole idea of Goku absorbing the power of the Super Saiyan God form into his base state, and has Whis imply that the kind of power Goku achieved, and Beerus currently possesses, cannot be surpassed with mere training, only to then double down on what happened in Resurrection F. In the Universe 6 Tournament arc, all of a sudden Goku and Vegeta, despite supposedly being strong enough to smack up anyone from Z with no effort, are now put into a position where narratively they need to somewhat struggle against opponents they should have no issue with. Kaba doesn't even know what Super Saiyan is at first, yet he's apparently so strong he's an equal to Vegeta in base despite having no God Ki and not even seeming that advanced by the standards we've seen from the Universe 7 Saiyans. And we see similar things from the likes of Frost as well. The common response to this is that the Universe 6 Saiyans are described as more advanced, but not only is the actual specifics of how they are more advanced never gone into, the explanation is simply not satisfying, and serves to once again make the growth Goku and Vegeta went through seem pointless. It's the "I've never trained" excuse all over again. And even if you don't care about the Universe 6 characters, it doesn't stop at just them. Piccolo in this same tournament is able to perform decently against Frost, who both Goku and Vegeta felt the need to transform against, which means that Piccolo has now also reached this new level of power. It hasn't even been that long since Battle of Gods. What has Piccolo even been doing? How did he manage to have way more intense training gains in what was probably only a little over a year than he did during the 7 years between the Cell games and the Buu saga? Was reaching God level always this easy? And it doesn't stop with him either. Trunks shows up, and of course he also falls into this power cliff. Then later on, so does Gohan, and by the Tournament of Power, basically the whole Dragon team has reached this new level Goku achieved, if not far surpassed it, and almost none of them did anything that significant to justify it beyond just vague training. It's to the point where in the modern day, I honestly do wish the whole idea of Goku absorbing all of that power into his base state had just been dropped, because it has amounted to absolutely nothing from a narrative perspective. You could just as easily have the God Ki within him only manifest when he transforms into Super Saiyan Blue, and basically nothing would change aside from some of the characters in Super not seeming quite as absurd when they give base Goku and Vegeta a run for their money. This next bit is more of a broad concept, but I definitely still think it's pretty relevant in regards to how this movie influenced Dragon Ball content that came later. Now, similar to power creep, there isn't anything wrong with wanting to have hype moments in your story. In fact, when you're writing something like a shonen battle manga, I'd say that if your story lacks hype moments that leave a strong impression on the audience, you're doing something wrong. Hype moments work best, though, when they're properly integrated into the story and serve to enhance it. When it feels like the story has been written to provide hype moments rather than them organically playing a part in the story, it starts to lose its substance. Sort of like eating candy versus actual food. It can still be enjoyable, but generally the more you think about the actual quality of it, you're going to like it less and less. This is a problem that plagues modern Dragon Ball more than possibly any other problem I've talked about, prioritizing hype and fan service over any actual coherent narrative. That's not to say that there aren't any modern Dragon Ball stories that have actual substance. Dragon Ball Super Broly, as an example, is a pretty decent movie in my opinion, but even when New Dragon Ball is at its best, you can tell the project was pitched based on an idea they thought would get fans excited, except for maybe Daima, and Resurrection F is definitely where you see that trend start. I think most reasonable people can agree that no matter what you think of the final product, Frieza coming back to life was not a good idea. Not only does it create numerous problems we've already talked about, but for it to even happen, the movie has to bend over backwards and make the Z-Fighters not investigate the strange ki they're sensing for whatever reason. I don't think this was a case of oversight, though. I'm sure that the people involved with this movie, Toriyama included, knew that this idea was going to take a lot of work to even make it remotely function, which then begs the question of why they even wanted to bring Frieza back instead of just introducing a new villain, and the answer is pretty obviously hype. Frieza is probably the most popular villain in the series' history, so bringing him back, while not a very good idea from a writing standpoint, is a very good idea from a business standpoint, as something like that is going to get butts in seats whether the movie is good or not. Super Saiyan Blue is another perfect example of this. At least Golden Frieza serves to sort of justify why Frieza is so strong, but Super Saiyan Blue, or as it was called at the time, Super Saiyan God Super Saiyan, really has no reason to exist within the movie. I've seen some people argue the form has a purpose from a visual storytelling perspective, as it's meant to demonstrate that Goku and Vegeta have begun to mix their natural ability to go Super Saiyan with God Ki, and while that is true to an extent, it's hard to praise that aspect of the form too much when it's thrown into the movie with almost no explanation and basically left up to the viewer to figure out what it is. Within the movie itself, it just feels like Super Saiyan God but a different color and with the Super Saiyan hair, which ends up making it feel pointless, because at that point, why didn't they just keep using normal Super Saiyan God? Really, the point is that the people involved with the movie knew that new transformations are yet another thing that will draw people's attention no matter what. So just like how Frieza coming back was picked due to its ability to generate hype, Super Saiyan Blue was thrown into the movie because they wanted a new form to get people excited, but didn't want to go through the trouble of actually setting it up. It's not like it would have been impossible to give the form more setup before it appeared. They had plenty of time to do so, but they decided they'd rather spend more time on the action scenes than actually doing anything interesting with Blue, so they didn't. I can only imagine decisions like having Frieza destroy the planet were also connected to this mindset. They needed the movie to have an exciting climax, and Vegeta just beating Frieza with no difficulty would obviously not work for that. And really, that's the thing. There are times where adding these exciting hype moments is a good idea, but when it comes at the cost of any actual decent storytelling, it makes the whole movie feel shallow, or worse in the case of what happened to Vegeta, extremely frustrating and almost mean-spirited. In the end, you can't just throw all of these exciting things at the wall and hope it makes for a satisfying experience. You need to work to make sure they improve the narrative you are trying to tell, which is something Toriyama was very capable of. But unfortunately, whether it be due to time or perhaps just him not being that passionate about this movie, a lot of the ideas feel much more phoned in rather than actually well executed. And like with all of these other problems, this issue of hype over substance carries over heavily into Super. All three new arcs are filled with relatively pointless transformations that serve very little purpose beyond looking cool, and many of the premises for the arcs themselves seem to be based around fan service rather than any actual interesting idea. Let's do a tournament so that way the entire arc can be centered around the Dragon Team fighting, and Goku can get a new form again. People want Future Trunks back, so let's bring him back. Who should he be running from? Evil Goku, sure. That works. Once again, the Tournament of Power is probably the arc that feels like it had the most potential to rise above this problem, but even it is filled with different moments that exist purely for fan service, from bringing Frieza back again, to female Broly, to Vegeta getting a new form so that his fans wouldn't complain about Goku leaving him in the dust, even though he does anyway. Even things like Broly and Superhero, which, for the record, I do like, are still based around ideas that were clearly envisioned as fan service first and a story second. At this point, I feel like I've said most of what I have to say. I genuinely don't want this to turn into an hour-long rant where I try to make people who like this movie feel stupid, or for that matter, disrespect a man that has consistently been one of my creative inspirations and idols since I was a child, so I'll try to wrap things up. If I had written this script when I was a bit younger, I probably would have ended it by saying something like, "This movie was a horrible idea, never should have been made," and to an extent, I still do agree with that sentiment. It's hard to deny that the movie's premise is asinine, and in general, the movie has done more damage to future projects with its success than good. But after watching Superhero and spending more time thinking on it, I started to realize that while I may have a very strong distaste for it, there are aspects of this movie that could have worked if they had been handled differently. Even Frieza coming back, as dumb as it is, could have maybe been slightly more acceptable. It just probably would have needed a change in focus to a character that isn't Goku. Don't worry, this isn't going to be a transition into me explaining my 500-page fanfiction about Vegeta being the one to kill Frieza and save the Earth, but I do think that if you wanted the premise of Frieza returning to work, having Goku be the central focus just isn't a very good idea. Goku sort of already got everything he could get out of Frieza as a villain in the Namek arc. That's probably why the movie just repeats his character arc, because there was nothing else to do. So if you were dead set on bringing Frieza back, the only real purpose I'd see in it from a storytelling perspective would be to serve as a showcase of development for another character who has a rich history with Frieza, but unlike Goku, couldn't defeat him and failed to get his revenge. Vegeta. That doesn't mean Goku shouldn't be in the movie at all, of course, but it may have been nice if he took more of a side role similar to how he does in Superhero. Maybe have Goku fight Frieza first, lose, then have Vegeta be the one to mix Super Saiyan with God Ki to give Blue more of a purpose. I don't know. At the end of the day, I'm not going to waste much time trying to rewrite a movie that already exists, as that's just pointless. So, to draw things to a conclusion, this movie is not very good. If you can't tell, I still haven't figured out how to end videos, so, coming soon. Broly, the legendary Super Saiyan. Worse than you remember? Alright, just kidding. Take it easy, everyone.